All right, thanks for joining. We're going to get started. Good afternoon. My name is Lindsay Shotlin, and I'm a registered dietitian at Mary Bird Perkins Cancer Center. Today, I am happy to welcome you to the second of three Lunch and Learns that will focus on nutrition and fitness topics related to survivorship. This webinar will be recorded, and there will be time for questions after the presentation. I'd like to first say thank you to the EJ and Marjorie B. Orso Family Foundation for sponsoring this series and furthering our mission to improve survivorship and lessen the burden of cancer through avenues such as education. According to the National Cancer Institute, an individual is considered a cancer survivor from the time of diagnosis through the balance of life, including those living with cancer and those free of cancer. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Elizabeth Courville-Raiford. Elizabeth is the owner and dietitian at Harvesting Nutrition LLC. Her job is to help clients learn how to eat in a way that feels best suited to their individual needs, cultural traditions, and preferences. She has almost 3 years of acute care clinical experience, 2.5 years in the private practice setting, and has helped 50 plus clients this year alone in bettering their nutrition and health habits. Her passion for helping people create a healthy relationship with food and their body comes from a personal struggle that she went through in early adulthood. She is now committed to providing weight neutral and inclusive care for all and hopes to eventually be able to work on public policies to help expand access to food to those who need it most. Elizabeth is an avid runner and will always opt to be outside whenever possible. In her downtime, she loves hanging out with her 2-year-old daughter and her husband. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for that amazing introduction. I am super happy to be here today and sharing a little bit about my passion, and hopefully you guys will have some really good takeaways from today. So without further ado, I'm going to dive into my presentation. So this is just a quick rundown on what we will be diving into today. So I will talk a little bit more about me and what I do, and then we will have a quick stop for some pre-presentation questions. We will have a little poll pop up for you guys to participate in, and then I will dive into the content, which will be focused on intuitive eating, what the principles of intuitive eating are. I'm going to talk about evidence that supports the use of intuitive eating within our diets, and then I'm also going to talk about mindful eating and what that is, plus some evidence to support using that within our diets. I'm also going to be going over some beginner tips. So some really practical things that we can do to start incorporating just some more intuitive and mindful eating practices. And then we will just do a quick summary and takeaways, plus the post-presentation questions. And then hopefully we have lots of time for answering questions. If you guys have any arise throughout the webinar, maybe jot them down so that we can get to those at the end of the webinar. So these are my goals for you. As you are listening today, I hope that you walk away less stressed about food and diets and just feel more confident in your food choices as an individual. I hope that you also feel empowered to make small and realistic changes to the way that you eat as you maybe have some takeaways from today. And then I hope you have a few new tools and strategies for how to improve your health after listening today as well. So a little bit more about me. As Lindsay mentioned, I am a dietitian. I am a registered and licensed dietitian, so I'm not some random nutritionist from the internet realm. I did do my bachelor's at LSU here in Baton Rouge. And then I completed my combined master's degree program and internship for dietetics here in Baton Rouge as well through Fran U, so Our Lady of the Lakes University here. And then, like Lindsay mentioned, I do have quite a few years of clinical experience under my belt, in addition to being in the private practice realm now for about 2.5 years. So I am loving being in private practice, and I am pretty close to making that my full-time gig, which is really exciting. Outside of my work, I have a 2-year-old, which keeps me pretty busy. And like Lindsay mentioned as well, I love being outside. I love running. I'm very into also sports nutrition. So that's a realm that I like to help clients with as well. I love to bake, and I really love a good cup of coffee as well. So that's what I'm typically up to outside of my work within disordered eating and eating disorder care. I also see a wide variety of clients in my practice, some of which struggle with PCOS, digestive issues, cardiovascular issues, things of that nature. But really my specialty and passion area is disordered eating and eating disorders. So that's a little bit about me. Now we'll stop really quickly for some pre-presentation questions. There's no pressure to know what the answers to these are quite yet, but hopefully at the end you will get the answers correct. But we should have a poll popping up. So just take a moment and select the answer you have your best guess for. So that was question number 1. Okay, okay. And then we have one more question we'll put up here. All righty. Question number 2. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys for participating in that pre-presentation questions. And so far, I feel like some of you might be knowing a little bit about what we're talking about, or at least can kind of put together some puzzle pieces. So let's dive into the main topics for today, which is intuitive eating and mindful eating. So many of you might have heard, at least more recently, about the term intuitive eating. It's certainly become more of a popular word or buzzword, especially on the internet and on social media nowadays. Um, but this is actually an approach that was developed by 2 dietitians back in the 90s. So the principles and the concept has been around for a while, but again, is more recently becoming a bit more popularized. It is an anti-diet, weight-neutral approach to eating. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means kind of throughout the presentation, but really is just focused around not having super rigid diet rules. And we aren't necessarily looking at weight as the main or a main indicator of health here. We're really thinking about what feels best to our body, because everybody's body and needs and preferences are very, very different. There are 3 key features to intuitive eating. So the first one is unconditional permission to eat when hungry, and also what food is desired in that moment. I think a lot of us feel pressure to eat in a very specific way, whether that is influenced by social media, the internet, the media at large, or just talking amongst friends and family and what diets they have been. There is a lot of pressure to have certain rules around food, I think. But with intuitive eating, the goal is to learn how to really honor what our body wants in that moment. And that means also whatever food we want in that moment. So if we had a meal plan we were trying to follow where maybe we were supposed to eat plain chicken and rice, but that wasn't sounding good to us in that moment, like I would I would want you to maybe think about what else might sound good, and encourage you to think outside the box and honor whatever it is maybe is sounding good to you in that moment. So unconditional permission to eat when hungry and also what food is desired is one key feature. Another is also eating for physical rather than emotional reasons. Now, not to say emotional eating is necessarily this inherently bad thing, but when we think about how eating makes our bodies feel, sometimes if we are maybe eating out of emotional hunger, we might tend to not be paying attention to our fullness cues, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in more detail. But trying to really tune back into the cues that our body gives us, and listening to how it's communicating to us is really the main driver in this key feature. And then the last one here is kind of similar to that, reliance on internal hunger and satiety cues to kind of determine when and how much to eat. So at the end of the day, intuitive eating is really about just that reconnection with our body's natural hunger and fullness cues. And I say reconnection just because our bodies, when we're born, we are actually really intuitive eaters at a baseline. If we think about infants, babies, toddlers, even, they have a really good connection with when they are hungry and when they are full. They will scream or yell when they are hungry, and then they will just simply stop eating when they are full or just not interested anymore. So we are all born intuitive eaters. So this isn't some, outlandish concept, but I do think that, especially coming into adulthood, there are, again, a lot of pressures to eat a certain way. And sometimes that is related to maybe feeling pressure to look a certain way. But being able to come back to this way of eating can be really empowering and can help you to feel your absolute best. So these are the 10 principles of intuitive eating. Now, I'm not going to talk about every single one of them today just because there is a lot going on here. But I did want to dive into 3 of these a little bit more deeply, just so that you get and pick up on some of the maybe more accessible ones that we can kind of learn from and incorporate a little bit more after our discussion today. So I wanted to start with the second principle, which is really all about honoring your hunger and learning how to reconnect with those physical hunger cues. I have the intuitive eating book that was written by the 2 dietitians who founded these principles in front of me. And I'm going to read a little section or blurb that they have talking about this principle. So it says, keep your body biologically fed with adequate energy and carbohydrates. Otherwise, you can trigger a primal drive to overeat. Once you reach the moment of excessive hunger, all intentions of moderate conscious eating are fleeting and irrelevant most of the time. So learning how to honor this biological signal sets the stage for rebuilding trust in yourself and in food. So again, we are intuitive in nature and at our baseline, but we want to try to reconnect with that if we have intention, or if we have unintentionally maybe lost that connection over time due to various reasons. The next principle I wanted to talk a little bit more about was feeling your fullness. I see a lot in my practice with clients where maybe they were, when they were children, maybe they were enforced the clean plate club. And while there are good intentions with, enforcing the clean plate club, we don't maybe want to waste food. And as parents, of course, we want what's best for our kids. We want them to get enough nutrition in. But unfortunately, what happens a lot of times with that clean plate club rule and how that can carry over into adulthood is we might lose the ability to be able to really tell when we are feeling full, whether that's in the middle of our meal, towards the end of the meal. Sometimes we just get into that habit. And so we every single time we eat, no matter how much it is, no matter how much is on our plate, we might just feel like we have to eat the entire thing, even though maybe that didn't make us feel good afterwards. So I have a little blurb here from the book about feeling your fullness. So it says, in order to honor your fullness, you need to trust that you will give yourself the foods that you desire. Listen for the body's signals that tell you that you are no longer hungry, and observe the signs that show you comfortably full. Pause in the middle of eating and ask yourself how the food tastes and what your current hunger level is. I think most of us in the busy society that we live in today certainly are not doing this. And even I, as an intuitive and mindful dietitian, catch myself just flying through the meal, not really paying attention to things. And then, at times I can definitely feel like I am maybe overly full, and it doesn't feel good. Of course, we all know that feeling. So trying to figure out what feels comfortably full for you can be a really important and empowering thing, as we are learning to reconnect with these internal hunger and fullness cues. So the last principle that I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into is this last one. And it says, honor your health with gentle nutrition. So this is all about incorporating good nutrition habits, but without the super rigid diet rules. So the blurb that they have in here in the book says, make food choices that honor your health and taste buds while making you feel good. Remember that you don't have to eat perfectly to be healthy. You will not suddenly get a nutrient deficiency or become unhealthy from one snack or one meal or one day of eating. It's what you eat consistently over time that matters. Progress, not perfection, is what counts. And I say this countless times with most of my clients throughout our work together. And that is that one meal or one snack will not make or break our health. I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to eat, again, in a very rigid or specific way with good intentions for our health. But a lot of times what ends up happening over time is that chronic stress to want to eat perfectly can end up doing us a disservice in terms of our nutrition status, and especially our digestive tract. Whenever we are chronically or even acutely stressed, our bodies are not able to digest food as properly and efficiently as it should. So, while we may be trying to eat this perfect meal, we may not even be digesting and absorbing the nutrients from it because of how stressed we were trying to make sure that we had this perfect meal put together. So it's all about finding a balance and realizing that there is no one meal that is going to completely obliterate your health. And the same goes for vice versa. No one perfect meal is going to completely heal your overall health either. Again, it's about what we do consistently over time that really matters the most. And I don't want to presume anything, but I did want to address this term called habituation, because a lot of times in my work with clients, when I talk about intuitive eating and how we can incorporate this, one of the first things that comes to mind is, oh, well, if I allow myself to have whatever I want, whenever I want, I would gain a bunch of weight, or I would just eat this one particular food all day long and never stop. Those thoughts, I completely understand where those are coming from. But just to give you a little peace of mind, there is a process that happens called food habituation, or really just we can think of this as habituation in a general sense. And what happens is this is a process that happens after repeated stimulus have been coming in. And when we talk about stimulus here with food, the food is the stimulus. So if we have been maybe exposing ourselves repeatedly to a certain type of food over time, eventually what happens is we don't get as much of a dopamine hit from it. We don't get all that excitement, and it just doesn't appeal like it used to. And this is I want to say this is really a preservational mechanism in place within our bodies. Because if we think about, maybe putting yourself in this mental space where maybe we think about our favorite food, if that's pizza, if that's ice cream, if it is a burger, whatever your favorite food is that you feel like maybe you would just get out of control around. I want you to really think about what it would feel like to only eat that particular food every single day for every single meal for, let's say, a week's time. Do we really think we would want to continue eating that food forever and ever and ever? And I would presume, I can't hear you right now, but I would presume that no. The answer is no. After a day, we would probably be very tired of that particular food, and we may even crave some vegetables or some fruits or something with some fiber, some water content, some micronutrients. Our bodies are very, very, very smart, and this mechanism of habituation absolutely kicks in, and it looks a little different for every single person. But I promise you that you will not only eat this one special food that you think you would be out of control around forever. Now, at first, we may eat a lot of it if we allow that unconditional permission, but again, eventually this habituation kicks in and our body will start to crave just naturally other things. Our bodies really need variety within our diet in order to thrive its best. So it's not going to allow us to only eat pizza every single day of the rest of our lives. It would not work. So I did want to mention this in case that was a concept going through your head while I talk about intuitive eating. So this is just a little piece of evidence that I like to talk about whenever I'm talking about intuitive eating. There is a lot of research out there to support the use of intuitive eating within our diets. There's especially been a lot more recently coming out since intuitive eating has become more of a popularized term and set of principles lately. But this meta-analysis happened between 2006 and 2015, and it found that intuitive eating was associated with greater body appreciation and satisfaction, positive emotional functioning, greater life satisfaction, unconditional self-regard and optimism, psychological hardiness, and a greater motivation to exercise when we focus on exercise that we enjoy. So I don't know about you, but all of those things sound great benefits to me. And I think that is just the icing on top of the cake when we think about intuitive eating and the potential for getting these benefits along with it. So that was intuitive eating, but I also want to talk about a concept called mindful eating. They are two different things, but they work really nicely together in order to have a really holistic and mindful, intuitive approach to our eating habits. They work really great together, and I will differentiate the two and what the differences are in just a moment. But mindful eating is a practice that involves being more fully present and aware with our food and body while we're eating. It's more so about the experience of food rather than just thinking about consuming it. And so here are some ways that we can include more mindfulness around our meal times. So first thing we can do is remove distractions from our meals whenever possible. And I know in today's society that is very busy and very go, 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 it can be easy for us to fall into the habit of scrolling on our phone while we're eating, or eating while we are working, or eating while we're watching TV. And sometimes that's okay. We can't be perfect, but I think it's always a nice experiment to try out and to try removing those distractions from one of your meals and seeing how that feels, seeing how the eating experience goes, because I can almost guarantee you that you will enjoy the experience more, you will feel better afterwards, and you will certainly be able to tune into those hunger and fullness cues a lot easier. Another thing we can do is chewing our food slowly and thoroughly. I think, again, in today's society that is very busy and go, 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 we do tend to maybe not chew our food quite enough or quite thoroughly enough, which can cause some poor digestion, gas, bloating after meals. So it's really, really important to slow down when we are able to and really focus on chewing our food thoroughly. Another thing we can do is trying to eat outside when the weather is nice. Finally, the weather seems like it might be cooling off a little bit. So this could be a great thing to try out as we enter into the cooler season here in Louisiana. Whenever you can get outside and being in nature can be very regulating to our nervous system, which can help promote better digestion and overall enjoyment of the meal. So would absolutely recommend trying to get outside whenever possible, whenever you're eating your meals or your snacks. And then lastly, we can try to engage all of our senses while we're eating. So trying to notice the sounds, the colors, the smells, the tastes, the textures of the food, and how you feel when you're eating them. When we engage all of our senses, this actually tells our brain that what we are doing is important. So if we are able to tell our brain that eating this meal is important, I think that our brains and our guts communicate very closely together. And so we will, again, potentially notice a very good benefit in terms of our digestion and ability to absorb those nutrients that we are eating as a result. So, some benefits of mindful eating would be, like I mentioned a few times here, better digestion, greater appreciation for the food, more enjoyment and less stress during meals, and feeling actually more satiated after meals. I see this a lot in my work with clients where they feel like something is just missing. They're not quite feeling satiated after their meals. And this is even if we're talking about, maybe we worked on looking at what's on their plate and really optimizing things in terms of their macro and their micronutrients. If we've done that work and, they are eating adequately in terms of that actual nutrition content, but they're still feeling not quite satisfied or satiated after a meal, it could be that, we're not eating mindfully and we're distracted and stressed out, and that can certainly contribute. So there is a huge benefit to mindful eating in that capacity. So there is some evidence to support mindful eating as well. There's tons of literature reviews out there. And one of them, I thought some of the findings that they found I thought was interesting was it was associated with, slowing down the pace of the meal, recognizing those feelings of fullness and greater control over overeating, which we talked about with intuitive eating. And it found that, when these mindfulness and mindful eating interventions were most successful, it actually helped to reduce binge eating and emotional eating, which again is also components of intuitive eating and reconnecting in that sense. So I think there's going to be a lot more exciting evidence to support mindful eating in the very near future. But there is quite obviously the reduced stress component that can be very helpful for people. So just to quickly differentiate, I mentioned these are two different things. They sound very similar, intuitive and mindful. They sound extremely similar, but these concepts and the frameworks are quite different. So with mindful eating, again, it's about the experience more so itself. The purpose is to slow down and savor. Using techniques like breathing, engaging those senses, and understanding the interconnectedness of eating and being with nature and other human beings is a really core component. And then it gives the eater a reprieve from stress and distracted eating. Now, intuitive eating, on the other hand, is about the understanding of your body's cues. That is the experience we're looking for there. The purpose is to give you answers about what, when, and how to eat. And we're using intrinsic body wisdom to guide food decisions and mindset shifts towards abundance with food. And again, we're all born intuitive eaters in nature. So again, it's about reconnecting with this intrinsic knowing that our body has. And then it gives the eater a chance to trust their own bodies and to make food decisions that make you feel good. So those are just some of the differentiation between the two practices. But again, they work together really nicely, which is why I like to present them both together. Um, so yeah. So I did want to mention just a few signs that you could benefit from intuitive and mindful eating. So if you find yourself feeling stressed or anxious around certain foods, if you are constantly hopping on or off really rigid diet plans, if you feel like you can't keep certain foods in your house for fear that you will overeat or binge on them, you might feel constantly like you're saying things like, oh, I should eat a salad instead, or I should go work out to burn off what I ate, or, really using those should or shouldn't words a lot with food, that could certainly be another sign. If you're in social situations where you don't have control over the food and that stresses you out, that would certainly be another sign. If you are constantly living in a place of when I lose weight, I will dot, 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 dot. If you are constantly just waiting for weight loss to happen to allow you to be able to do the things you want to do and to live your life more fully, that would also be another really big sign that you could benefit from incorporating some of these things. And then lastly, if you do struggle with GI issues like constipation or diarrhea, excessive gas and bloating after meals, these intuitive and mindful eating practices could also be a huge benefit to you as well. So these are a few beginner tips. The first thing I like to mention is the most important thing we can do with our bodies is to make sure we're eating enough. I think a lot of us who are trying to follow really rigid, potentially low calorie diets will oftentimes be feeling depleted and again, very stressed out about our food intake in general. So the first thing is really focusing on eating enough, and oftentimes that means eating every 3 to 4 hours or so, or that comes down to maybe 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks a day. Another thing you can do is start to incorporate all foods and even those that you maybe have previously restricted or made off limits. And just remember, food habituation happens, and you don't have to be scared that you're going to be out of control and eating those things and only those things for the foreseeable future. Your body will not allow for that. Another thing you can do is try to remove distractions from meal times and try to focus more on your hunger and fullness cues throughout that meal. Give yourself some time and grace. This sort of intuitive and mindful eating practices may not be clicking overnight, but just like with any habit, we want to focus on it, incorporating it in small amounts and realistic amounts, and giving ourselves time for that to really start to feel more of a natural thing. And seek support if you feel like you need some more information or tips in terms of embracing intuitive eating and mindful eating. It can be really challenging to shift our focus to intuitive and mindful eating whenever we come from years of very rigid dieting or hopping on and off diets over the course of our lifetime. It can be really hard to incorporate these things. So if it's something you're really passionate about incorporating, there are lots of support options out there for you. So quickly, just some summary and takeaways. Intuitive eating is really about learning how to trust our body's cues again. Remember, we are born intuitive eaters. We can be mindful while we eat, and that can help us to feel more satisfied after meals, improve digestion, and just overall increase our enjoyment of meals. Intuitive and mindful eating are not diets, but are more so lifestyle changes. And then lastly, everyone can really benefit from incorporating some of these concepts, whether it's all of it or whether it's just one piece of it. I think people can really find a lot of benefits in these. So that concludes the content. I do have a couple of things I will go over after these post-presentation questions, but we're going to put up those polls again to see if there have been any changes after learning all these things. Amazing. Awesome. You guys did amazing. I think it was 100% at the beginning of this. So, but hopefully all of what I just shared will stick a lot better now that you've heard all of that and we've done these questions. Um, with the benefits of intuitive and mindful eating, all of those things, better digestion, greater appreciation of food, and feeling more satiated, absolutely all of the above. And then the only one in there for that second one that's actually an intuitive eating principle is honor your hunger, which we did talk a lot about. So I'm so glad that you guys were able to get those correct. These are just a couple of my references that I used throughout the presentation. And then I did want to plug a few resources if you guys feel like you would like additional support, like I mentioned. So the book that I have with me and was a really big part of my intuitive eating education was actually reading the book that was written by the two dietitians who founded the framework. So that is available online on their website, but also places like Amazon, really anywhere you get a book, you should be able to find it. And then this is my Instagram page. So I talk a lot about intuitive eating here. If you want to take out your phone and scan the little QR code there, it should bring up my profile so that you can follow me and learn a little bit more. And if you also have additional questions and concerns, you can certainly shoot me a DM on there if you do have Instagram and you enjoy being on there. But I would love to have you following along. I try to be pretty active on there. It's been a lot of fun posting content about intuitive eating there. So you can certainly feel free to follow me there. And then I did want to mention, so everyone who has joined today will be sent over a copy of this resource that I developed for my clients and also for events like this where I talk about intuitive and mindful eating. So these just really kind of condense things down into a few little practical tips that we can do to help create a more mindful eating experience. So you'll have this as a takeaway from today. I think we'll move into Q&A mode, if that is.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We really enjoyed the presentation and we do have a few questions for you.
Awesome.
Okay, so the first one is, how do you recommend trying to eat slower and pay attention during meals, especially at work?
Yeah. So that is a great question. I think that sometimes when we maybe think about the environment in which we're eating, that can sometimes be a barrier, right, to having a more mindful eating experience. If we don't have many options, if we have our little desk cubicle and there's other things going on, that can be really hard. But what I would suggest, if possible, is again, maybe trying to eat outside, especially since the weather's getting better. If there's maybe a picnic table in the area, or I mean, maybe even bringing a little towel so you can grab that from your car and just like picnic. I don't know what your specific situation is like at work, but trying to get outside if you can. Or another option would be, depending on where you're at and what the options are, maybe looking at finding like a quiet conference room that's not in use, or, maybe someone's office that's not being used, trying to sniff around and see if you can find at least just a quiet, non-stressful place where you can sit down, have your lunch, and not have all those distractions around you. But if those are not really options or don't really sound appealing, I think one of the easiest things we can do is just put our phone on airplane mode. Just put it on airplane mode, set it aside. And then if you do typically do a lot of work on your computer, really just trying to distance yourself from that. And it doesn't have to be this overnight thing, right? Like I mentioned, you don't necessarily have to force yourself to go from, eating while working every single day to all of a sudden not doing that. Maybe just start with 1 to 2 times a week, like 1 to 2 lunches, maybe being intentional about stepping away from the computer, putting the phone on airplane mode, and then just giving yourself that time to enjoy your meal without all of that stress. And typically what happens if we start with 1 to 2 times a week, that feels really good. So we're a lot more motivated to maybe set those boundaries maybe for majority of the week, but it's not something we have to be perfect with. I think it's all about taking small steps and seeing how it feels. And again, you might end up having a lot more motivation after just trying it out afterwards. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Liz. That I like that you incorporated taking small steps to it. That's very approachable. Okay, next question we have is how do you handle the worry of weight gain and body image issues after letting go of food rules and restricted eating?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly one that I help clients navigate a lot. With weight gain specifically, I always like to mention, our weight, I think, is a lot more out of our control than we might like to think. I think the society we live in is, of course, very focused on appearance and weight ideals, especially for females. And so, it can be very scary to think about letting go of those diet rules that we maybe have been trying to adhere to for quite some time out of that fear of gaining weight. And that is a complicated thing to work through. And there's a lot that goes into it in my work with clients. But I think, my biggest maybe tip or takeaway with that specific topic with, that fear of weight gain is thinking about our quality of life. When we think about dieting and all these rigid food rules, if we put ourselves and maybe think about ourselves, maybe when we're 70, 80, 90 years old, if we live that long, if we think about where we want to be with food at that point, do we want to still be on this really rigid diet and worrying about and stressing about all of those things? Probably not. We at that point in life, we're probably wanting to focus on other things. So we don't, I think when we put ourselves in our future selves shoes, that can be really helpful thinking about our overall quality of life and, kind of weighing, no pun intended, the risks and benefits there. What I will also say is, it's really important when we make this jump to more intuitive and mindful eating to think about body image and how it's going to impact how we feel about ourselves in our bodies and how we feel in our bodies. So, in my work with clients, I like to help them, whether they're coming from more of a negative place or more of a neutral place with body image, I like to help them work towards that next step. So, if maybe we already, even if we're dieting and maybe feel like we're at a good place weight wise, that doesn't necessarily mean we don't have negative body image. We might still be really uncomfortable. We might still feel like there's things we need to do or lose weight or this or that. So if we are coming from a place of more negative body image, we certainly, want to work towards just more neutrality. Because I think jumping all the way to being super body positive, especially when we're thinking about making a change like this, feels very out of reach. So I try to work with my clients very realistically, very achievably towards something called body neutrality and really just getting to a place where we can respect and appreciate our body no matter what our body shape or size is. Because at the end of the day, our weight is not necessarily a direct indicator for our overall health. And our weight will fluctuate over time. There's no way to get around that. As we age, things are going to change, so it's inevitable that there will be fluctuations throughout our life. So learning how to cope with that earlier rather than later is certainly something that I try to help my clients focus on. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, another one. Can you still have calorie or protein goals while practicing intuitive eating?
Yeah, that is a really great question. I like that. So I do think there are some instances where we might still feel like we want to have some ideas or some numbers in mind in terms of calories or protein. I more so tend to not recommend like tracking overall calorie intake if we can help it. Again, there are certain situations where that's necessary, but for the average person who is wanting to make healthier habits, it's really not a requirement if we can get to a place where we are a little bit more intuitive and mindful. So, yes and no, but especially when it comes to protein, I think it can be really helpful for people to have some sort of goal in terms of whether it's total per day or whether we're talking about each meal and like snacks, because protein is really important for helping us to feel actually satiated and full after our meals and is obviously just an essential macronutrient that we need for lots of various reasons throughout our body. So, yes and no, you can certainly still be intuitive and track those things to some degree. But I think that whenever we're starting the journey, it can be, I think, more difficult to be doing those things and trying to work on being more intuitive, if that makes sense. Like, I think once we're in a better place in terms of being more intuitive, then if we have specific goals in mind, or if we're worried we're maybe not eating enough of total energy or total protein intake, then sometimes it can feel okay and like safe to go ahead and start tracking those things again. But it can be really tricky with the numbers because we do tend to get a little too obsessive with those things. So I think it depends on the individual, and I think it also depends on your intention when it comes to why we are counting calories or having that protein goal. Again, if the protein goal especially is to help you to feel more satiated and full with your meals, or if you're managing diabetes or PCOS, that can be a really important component for blood sugar management as well. So I think it really just depends on the person and your intention, and also just where you are in terms of the intuitive eating journey. If you're really early on, I don't typically recommend that.
Thank you. That was a great answer, some good insight to the it doesn't need to be an all or nothing mindset.
Exactly.
Okay, and one last question we have is how can we avoid stress eating, specifically junk food, while at work?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a big topic. I think I have a lot of clients, especially when we first start working together, that report that they do typically eat things at work where they might not have at home. Um, and I think there's a couple of reasons why that might happen, but I think it really all boils down to a sense of scarcity versus abundance. So if there are foods at work, whether it's in your office or if it's in the break room, or if you maybe eat out at lunch a lot for work, those foods that you maybe don't keep around at home that you might deem as, junk food or just not as nutritious. The reason you might feel more inclined to eat a lot of those or eat those regularly when you're at work could be due to that sense of scarcity, because we know that we don't have that at home. This is something a little bit special. It's kind of like maybe higher up on a pedestal than just the normal foods, quote unquote, that we might have at home. So a lot of times that scarcity mindset can kick in. And so whenever we're at work, we're immediately immediately surrounded with those things that we otherwise try to restrict. So as human beings, we will want that even more. So there's one layer to it. The other layer of this would be the emotional eating component. So if you feel like you are someone who doesn't have a lot of other coping skills besides food, if food is kind of your go-to when it comes to stress or feeling overwhelmed or anger or whatever the emotion is, if you feel like food is your go-to, um, then that can be a sign that we maybe need to have just more coping skills, like maybe doing some deep breathing instead of reaching for the food, or journaling instead of reaching for the food, or calling a friend instead of reaching for the food. So sometimes it's just a matter of having other options for coping besides just the food. But it's also okay to occasionally emotionally eat. Like, we're emotional beings, and food is something that is just a requirement for our bodies. So to think that we'll never emotionally eat is kind of a crazy concept. So don't beat yourself up if you find that happening, but I would just encourage you to explore that, and try to get down into the root cause. Like, is it more so the scarcity mindset, or is it that maybe we need some more coping tools, or is it both, and working on both of those.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Those were all really great questions. Thank you everyone for participating. Again, this will be recorded, and at the end of all 3 sessions, I will be happy to send you all the recordings. But thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everyone. I hope you all have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.